The drone was flying a routine survey of a remote canyon in southwestern Utah when its operator noticed something that should not have been there. A flash of color, deep in a slot ravine that no hiker had ever recorded entering. Faded red, faded blue, faded yellow. The colors of 5 backpacks that had been reported missing in the spring of 1996, when 5 college students from a small liberal arts school in Iowa drove a borrowed van across the country for a spring break trip they would never come back from. That is not a story about 5 young people who got lost in the desert. That is a story about a single quiet decision made by a person no one suspected, that took 5 lives and hid them for 28 years in a place the search teams were specifically told not to look. And it would take a drought, a hobbyist drone pilot, and a single nylon strap still tied to a piece of weathered aluminum to finally name the person responsible. But before we get to any of that, we have to go back to the second week of March 1996, because to understand what was lost, you first have to understand who these 5 people were. The spring of 1996 in Mount Vernon, Iowa, was the kind of season that felt like a promise. The snow had finally broken in the first week of March. The corn stubble in the fields around Cornell College was steaming in the morning sun, and the campus radio station was playing the same 3 Counting Crows songs on a loop from a CD that someone had left in the booth in November. Cornell was the kind of small school where everyone knew everyone, where the dining hall closed at 7 and the library stayed open until midnight, and where the 5 students at the center of this story had been inseparable since their freshman orientation in the fall of 1994. Their names were Daniel Reyes, Emily Hartwig, Caleb Whitford, Priya Acharya, and Justin Mock. Daniel was 21. A biology major from El Paso who carried a worn paperback copy of Desert Solitaire in his back pocket and could name every cactus species in the American Southwest. Emily was 20, a studio art major from Madison, Wisconsin, who painted in the same paint-spattered overalls every day and called her mother every Sunday afternoon from the payphone outside her dorm. Caleb was 22, a senior, the unofficial leader of the group, an Eagle Scout from Minneapolis who had organized the entire trip in a green spiral notebook with maps taped onto the inside pages. Priya was 20, a chemistry major from suburban New Jersey who had never been west of the Mississippi River and had been talking about this trip since Thanksgiving. Justin was 21, an English major from rural Missouri who drove a 1987 Plymouth Voyager that he had inherited from his grandmother. A maroon van with a single VHS tape. A river runs through it, permanently lodged in the dashboard player. They had been planning this trip for 15 months. The itinerary in Caleb's notebook was meticulous. They would drive from Mount Vernon to Denver in a single day, sleep in a Motel 6, then drop south through the Colorado Plateau toward Moab, Utah, where they had reserved a campsite at a small commercial campground called Red Cliffs. From there, they planned to spend 4 days exploring the Slick Rock country. On Friday, March 15, 1996, at 5:42 in the morning, they pulled out of the parking lot behind Justin's dorm with the van loaded down with 5 backpacks, 2 cases of bottled water, a cooler full of bagels and peanut butter, and a disposable Kodak camera that Emily had bought from the campus store the night before. Caleb's mother, Linda, stood at the curb in her bathrobe and watched them leave. She had driven down from Minneapolis just to see them off. She would tell investigators 11 days later that she had stood in that parking lot until the van's taillights disappeared at the end of the street. She did not know that she would never see her son again. The campground in Moab took the van's arrival at 7:14 in the evening on Saturday, March 16th. Records confirm this. The owner of the Red Cliffs campground, a man named Hal Brennan, signed them in personally and assigned them Site Number 11, a flat patch of dirt at the back of the property near a stand of cottonwoods. Brennan would later tell investigators that the 5 students seemed exhausted, but happy. They paid for 4 nights in cash. They asked him for advice on day hikes. Brennan, who had operated the campground for 19 years and knew the surrounding canyons better than almost anyone in the county, recommended several routes. He marked them on a paper map with a red ballpoint pen. He also gave them, unprompted, the name of a specific canyon that he said was less crowded than the popular spots. He called it Coyote Wash. He drew a small star next to it on the map. On Sunday morning, March 17th, the 5 students drove out of the campground at approximately 8:30 a.m. with day packs, water, sandwiches, and the disposable Kodak. They told the family camping at site number 10 that they were going to do a long loop and would be back before dinner. They did not come back before dinner. They did not come back that night. By Monday morning, the family at site number 10 told Hal Brennan that the maroon Plymouth Voyager had not returned. Brennan drove out to look for it. He found the van parked at a trailhead 7 miles from the campground, locked, with nothing visible through the windows. He drove back to the campground. He called the sheriff's office in Grand County at 10:47 a.m. By Monday afternoon, the first search teams were on the ground. By Tuesday, the FBI had been notified. By Wednesday, the parents of all 5 students had flown into Salt Lake City and rented cars to drive south. Linda Whitford got there first. She stood at the trailhead where her son's van was still parked and refused to leave until she was physically guided away by a deputy. The trailhead was at the mouth of a small slot canyon. The deputies had been told to search it. They did. They found nothing. The canyon they searched was not Coyote Wash. The lead investigator on the case was a man named Special Agent Tom Cordero of the FBI's Salt Lake City field office. Cordero was 38, a former Marine, a father of 3 young daughters, and a man with a reputation for working cases that other agents had given up on. He arrived in Moab on the evening of March 21st with 2 analysts and a binder full of topographical maps. By the second week of the search, more than 200 volunteers were combing the canyons around the trailhead. National Guard helicopters flew grid patterns at low altitude. Tracking dogs from 3 states were brought in. Nothing was found. No clothing, no tracks, no water bottles. No sign that 5 human beings had ever set foot in any of the canyons being searched. Cordero became frustrated. He interviewed Hal Brennan 3 times in the first 10 days. Brennan was cooperative, polite, helpful. He produced the paper map he had drawn for the students. He showed Cordero the route he had recommended. The route was real, well-traveled, and had been thoroughly searched. The detail Cordero would not learn for 28 years was that Brennan had drawn a second map for the students that morning before they left. A map with a different canyon on it. A canyon that did not appear on any of the search grids. The 2 suspects of interest in the early weeks of the case were not Brennan. They were a transient who had passed through the campground 3 days before the students arrived, and a local man with a prior assault conviction who had been seen at the trailhead parking lot on Sunday morning. Both were interviewed extensively. The transient had been in Cortez, Colorado, on the day the students disappeared with receipts. The local man had been at his sister's wedding in St. George. Both were eliminated within 30 days. Linda Whitford and Emily Hartwig's father, a high school teacher named Glenn Hartwig, drove the canyon country together for 2 months that spring. They slept in Glenn's pickup truck. They knocked on the door of every isolated ranch within 60 miles of Moab. They paid for billboards in 3 states. The local newspaper, the Times Independent, ran weekly updates for the entire summer. By August of 1996, The FBI had quietly downgraded the case from active investigation to ongoing review. Cordero did not agree with the decision. He kept the case file in a banker's box that he carried with him every time he was reassigned for the next 22 years until he retired in 2018 and gave the box to his successor. By 2001, 5 years had passed. The maroon Plymouth Voyager had been released to Justin Mock's mother, who could not bring herself to sell it and let it sit under a tarp behind her farmhouse in Missouri until the tires rotted into the gravel. By 2004, Glenn Hartwig had been diagnosed with the cancer that would kill him 3 years later. He spent his final summer painting a portrait of his daughter from the last photograph he had of her, a snapshot taken at a Denver gas station on the morning of March 16, 1996. Priya Acharya's parents kept her bedroom in their New Jersey home exactly as she had left it for 19 years. Daniel Reyes's mother lit a candle on her kitchen counter every March 17th and let it burn until it went out on its own. Caleb's notebook, the green spiral one with the maps taped inside, sat on Linda Whitford's coffee table in Minneapolis for 28 years, and Linda dusted it every Saturday morning when she dusted the rest of the living room. By 2010, the campground in Moab had been sold to new owners who did not know the names of the 5 students who had once stayed there. By 2018, Special Agent Cordero retired. By 2022, every major newspaper that had covered the case in 1996 had moved its archives behind a paywall, and the case had been mentioned in print exactly twice in the previous decade. But Linda Whitford was still alive. She was 73 years old. She had stopped traveling to Utah in 2015 because her knees would not allow it. But she still spoke to her son every morning when she made her coffee. And she still kept his Eagle Scout sash folded in a drawer in her bedside table. And she still believed, with the kind of belief that does not require evidence, that one day someone would find them. Every case on this channel represents weeks of digging through records and piecing together lives that the world tried to forget. If a story like this matters to you, please take a second to like this video, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Now, let's get back to Linda Whitford and her son. The autumn of 2024 was the driest in the recorded history of southeastern Utah. The Colorado Plateau had been in drought for 4 years, and by October the rangers at Arches National Park were closing trails that had never been closed before. On the morning of October 9th, a man named Wes Olander, a 51-year-old land surveyor from Grand Junction, Colorado, was running a quadcopter drone over a section of public land 12 miles southwest of Moab. He was not searching for anything. He was helping a client map the boundaries of a parcel that was being considered for purchase. The drone was at an altitude of about 200 feet when its forward camera caught something against the red sandstone wall of a narrow slot canyon. Olander brought the drone down. He hovered it at 50 feet and zoomed in. What he saw, lodged against a granite boulder in the deepest part of the slot, was the unmistakable outline of a backpack. Faded red, half buried in silt. He flew the drone deeper into the canyon. He saw a second backpack, then a third, then what appeared to be a tent pole, then a piece of fabric that the wind was lifting slightly off the sand. Olander landed the drone. He stood in the desert for a long time. Then he drove to the sheriff's office in Moab. The recovery operation took 6 weeks. The Slot Canyon, which appeared on no commercial maps and on only one obscure Uski's topographical survey from 1962, was named Coyote Wash on that survey. The 5 students had been at the bottom of it for 28 years. The remains were recovered. So were 5 backpacks, a disposable Kodak camera with film still inside it, Caleb Whitford's green spiral notebook in a Ziploc bag in the bottom of his pack, and a paper map drawn in red ballpoint pen. The map had not been entered into the original case file. The map had Hal Brennan's handwriting on it. The Utah State Crime Lab confirmed the handwriting match on November 22, 2024, comparing the recovered map to the campground registration card Brennan had filled out for the students 28 years earlier. The DNA on a strand of hair caught in a backpack zipper produced a familial match in a public genealogy database, the same kind of database that ordinary people use to look up their family history, to a man whose own daughter had submitted her sample 2 years earlier. The man was Hal Brennan. Brennan was now 79 years old. He still lived in Moab. He had sold the campground in 2008 and moved into a small house on the edge of town, where he lived alone, attended the Methodist church on Sundays, and was known to his neighbors as a kind, quiet, helpful old man who shoveled their walkways in the winter and brought them tomatoes from his garden in the summer. He had never been a suspect. He had been a witness. He had been the last adult to see the 5 students alive, and he had presented himself, from the first moments of the investigation, as a grieving, helpful, cooperating member of the community. He had wept at the press conferences. He had attended Glenn Hartwig's funeral in 2007. He had sent Linda Whitford a Christmas card every year for 16 years. On the morning of December 4, 2024, 4 FBI agents arrived at his house. The lead agent was a woman named Special Agent Renata Marsh, a 36-year-old investigator who had inherited the case from Tom's Cordero's banker's box 6 years earlier and had quietly worked it on her own time for every weekend of those 6 years. Brennan opened the door. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back and let her in. He sat at his kitchen table. He drank a glass of water. He asked if he could call his pastor. The agents told him he could call anyone he wanted. He did not call anyone. What he said next was recorded. He said he had drawn the second map because he wanted them to see something beautiful. He said he had followed them out to the trailhead later that morning to make sure they had not gotten lost. He said something happened in the canyon that he did not fully remember. He said he had been carrying the rifle he used for coyotes. He said he had not slept a single full night since March 17, 1996. Hal Brennan was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder on December 19, 2024. He pleaded guilty in April of 2025 in exchange for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He will die in the Utah State Correctional Facility in Gunnison. He is 79 years old. The disposable Kodak camera that had been in Emily Hartwig's backpack was sent to a specialty lab in Rochester, New York, that still processed 30-year-old film. The technicians recovered 17 usable images. The last image on the roll was a photograph of all 5 of them, taken at arm's length, smiling, standing at the mouth of a slot canyon in the soft late-morning desert light. Their faces are open. Their packs are still on their shoulders. They are alive. They are happy. They have no idea what is coming. That photograph now hangs in the lobby of Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa, where 5 new memorial scholarships, one for each of them, are awarded every year to students pursuing studies in their respective fields. Linda Whitford received the news of the recovery in her kitchen in Minneapolis on a Friday morning in November. She was making coffee. Special Agent Marsh called her personally. Linda would later say, in the only interview she gave, that she had set the phone down on the counter and walked into the living room and picked up her son's green spiral notebook, the one she had been dusting every Saturday for 28 years, and she had held it against her chest, and she had finally let herself cry the way she had not allowed herself to cry since the spring of 1996. There is a question worth sitting with at the end of a story like this one. How many people who appeared, for decades, to be the very picture of a helpful, kindly, trustworthy member of a community are still hiding what they did inside that performance? How many slot canyons? How many drought summers? How many drone pilots will it take to find the rest of them? What do we owe to the 5 families who waited 28 years for an answer that no investigator was looking for in the right place? And what do we owe to the next Hal Brennan? The one who is still alive, still drawing maps, still pouring coffee for strangers and signing their registration cards with a steady hand. Justice came for Daniel Reyes, Emily Hartwig, Caleb Whitford, Priya Acharya, and Justin Mock after 28 years. Stories like theirs remind us that truth, however slow, however deep it has been buried, however carefully it has been performed over, always finds its way back to the surface. If you believe that too, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved cold cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here. Thank you for remembering them.